It's great and all that the Kraken are consistently playing pretty well, but it would be nice if they could consistently get some points to actually show for it. I suppose at least the good news there is that the next 5 games are against teams that, well, let's just say it's in those teams' best interest to be losing games at this point in the season. What's Kraken, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken do honestly play pretty well once again against another playoff-bound team, and this time they even kept it close, unlike the one in Minnesota. But once again, they have nothing to show for it as they fall 3-1 3-1 to the LA Kings. But one of those three is an empty netter, so it is closer than it might look. And with them again not having gotten any points out of this game, even if they played it well, they have now kind of stumbled their way through these last few decent teams left on their schedule, aside from the final 2 games of the season against Vegas. And with the Nashville win in the same night, as well as both the Jets and Flames not having played, it is getting a little bit tighter again in that wild card race. Now, again, the Kraken are still in a good spot and absolutely in the driver's seat to get one of those wild card spots, and especially that first one. But they are now in a place where they definitely have to take care of business against these 5 easier opponents coming up, at least in most of those games, if not all of them. And if they're not able to do so, then they are going to have to get at least 1 or hopefully 2 wins against Vegas in the end. Which, for what it's worth, I think they're going to be able to do. They actually have played pretty well in these games against teams they should be beating. Again, like we've said a couple of times, there have been a couple of exceptions here and there over the season that definitely stand out in the mind to that, and maybe warp the perspective a bit on how the Kraken actually play against these worse teams. But for the most part, they have been able to take care of those games, and with 3 games against Arizona, 1 against Vancouver, and another against Chicago, this should be a stretch that the Kraken come out with at least 8 to 10 points in. And if they are able to do that, and honestly, even if they just get 7 points out of these next 5 games, they'll pretty much have locked up that first wildcard spot, and what happens in those 2 games against Vegas will pretty much just be warm-up for the playoffs. As far as who the Kraken play in the playoffs, we still have no idea. With the result of tonight's game, it's a little bit less likely that it's going to be the Kings, but still a lot is up in the air there. And again, with the Kraken having played pretty well, other than goaltending against both Minnesota and now the Kings, as long as they keep playing the way they have over these last few, they should be able to get those points they need in these next upcoming games. Speaking of goaltending, as we get more specifically into this game against the Kings, which we'll probably end up getting through pretty quickly, it was a fairly low event game, and I don't think that many people are eager to spend too long reliving this loss. Well, probably the most interesting part of this game, at least as far as it relates to the last couple weeks of the season and the first round of the playoffs, is the fact that there weren't any changes in the lineup, which specifically I'm talking about no changes in goal, as although I was expecting Grubauer to be back, kind of thinking that that game against the Ducks was a chance to get the legs back under Jones a bit and get him a spot start, which he hadn't started in a while, maybe knock some of the rust off, and then put Grubauer back in net against one of the teams that you could end up seeing in the playoffs. Nope, they stuck with Jones since he did do well against the Ducks, even if it is the Ducks. And to be fair to Jones, he did have a fairly decent night in net for the Kraken, not a fantastic one by any means, but a decent, serviceable night. Sure, he gets out-dueled by Copley at the other end, but he at least kept the Kraken in this game right up until the end. So, pretty much the type of performance you'd want to see from your backup goaltender going into the playoffs. That being said, the Kraken do need more of the performance the Kings got out of Copley to actually make some noise in the playoffs, but we're just going to have to wait and see if they can get that from either Grubauer or Jones. At this point, it seems more likely it'll come from Grubauer if it's either one. And that's certainly going to be true if they end up facing a team playing like the Kings are, or the Kings themselves at some point in the playoffs, playing, as we saw, especially in that first period, very low event hockey with both teams only managing 6 shots on goal, and not particularly dangerous ones at that. The type of game where every goal really, really matters. Pretty much the opposite of that 8-9 game that we saw back in January. Or was that December? I don't know, a while ago. Oh, wow, that was actually all the way back in November. Either way, this is much more the type of game that the Kings are likely to be playing in the playoffs if the Kraken do end up facing them, and even if it isn't the Kings, there are some other teams that like this style, like the Wild, for example, or even the Stars tend to play more that way. Both teams the Kraken could definitely end up seeing in the first round. And for what it's worth, this low event style of hockey is a style that I think the Kraken are built to be able to play. Heck, I'd even go so far as to say it's the style of hockey the Kraken were built to play. But as we know, in spite of this being a team built by Ron Francis and coached by Dave Haxtell, both of whom have a bit of a reputation for being more defensive-minded first and take care of the offense later, this has been a team that's found success by scoring a lot of goals on the rush. Not necessarily what either of the two of them are known for, but it's been working, so they've leaned into it and it's gotten them where they are. But that run and gun style that's been working for the Kraken is also a style that tends to not work as well in the playoffs unless you have a back end and especially a backstop in net that can make up for any rushes coming back the other way, which has not always been the case for the Kraken and certainly not consistently enough that they could make a deep run. Now, yes, I'm well aware that I don't think anybody's expecting a deep run out of the Kraken, at least not this early on, maybe in a couple of years. But once you make the playoffs, which I still think is much more likely than not for the Kraken at this point, I mean, you might as well start thinking about how that run could end up going and what the Kraken could do to make the most out of it. Anyway, we're getting off topic again, so let's get back to the game at hand, where, like I said, the first period, not terribly eventful, very much the style of game the Kings have been playing of late and would like to keep playing into the playoffs. Just 6 shots for each side, no goals, and honestly, no terribly dangerous scoring opportunities, except for maybe a couple that came close to a dangerous opportunity on the one power play of this period, which was for the Kraken, and those opportunities, to be clear, were also for the Kraken. But by the end of one, it's still 0-0, and it kind of stays this way into the first few minutes of the second, as I'm pretty sure the first 5 or 6 minutes of this only featured another 2 shots each. But eventually things do start leaning a little bit more towards the Kings as we get into the middle of the period, and unfortunately they do end up getting on the board first right about halfway through the game. And this one is absolutely not on Jones whatsoever. It just comes on a bit of a mixture between an unfortunate and broken play from the Kraken in their defensive end. It all starts where the Kings, and Durzi in particular, has the puck behind the Kraken net, but he kind of falls over, I think, of his own accord, just on accident, behind the net, although as he falls, is able to get the puck up along the boards around the corner to the far side. Unfortunately, him falling turns out to be the perfect camouflage. While he's sat down on the ice with his back against the boards, Schultz just completely forgets about him, I guess figuring he can't really do much harm while sitting on the ice behind the net. But as it turns out, he's perfectly capable of standing back up and getting into the play, which is what he does. And as the puck out on the other side eventually finds Iafallo out in the slot, Iafallo, while his pass is slightly broken up by McCann, it's still able to trickle past McCann and to the far side, the back door, where Durzi's been able to get up and get himself right into that spot to receive the pass, which I think if Iafallo had gotten everything on this pass, I don't know if Durzi would have been able to get back in time. So McCann slowing the pass down works in the Kings' favor. Durzi gets there just in time to put it into what's basically an empty net on the far side of Jones, with Jones not having any chance whatsoever to get to the far post to make the save. And the Kings, through all of that, have the 1-0 lead. And from there, the Kings continue to press over the next few minutes, and really up until pretty much the last couple minutes of the second period, where the Kraken are able to finally start to turn things around. And the good news is they're able to keep that going into the start of the third, where they get the better of the Kings pretty handily here in the start of the third, with a ton of offensive zone pressure and creating a couple of nice scoring chances. But again, Phoenix Copley is playing very well in net for the Kings and keeping everything out, which unfortunately even includes, after that Kraken pressure kind of peters out a bit, they do get one more very good scoring opportunity as Tolvanen gets set loose on a breakaway by Gord on a very nice stretch pass through the neutral zone, but Copley makes that save, and then right back the other way not long after, the Kings are going to get their own very nice open look, not quite breakaway good, but it is an open look as Grundstrom pickpockets Tanev as he's on his way out of the Kraken end, but before he crosses the blue line, Grundstrom does sneak up behind him, steals the puck, whips around, goes right back towards the net. up by the faceoff circle. Right as Borgen gets up in his face, he fires off that shot and finds the top corner perfectly over the glove of Jones and into the net to give the Kings the 2-0 lead. And this one is probably one you'd like to see Jones make a save on. Again, is it the easiest save? No. But if we're talking playoff hockey, this is the type of save you need your goaltender to be able to make. Obviously, not the play you'd like to see Tanev make. Still good that Borgen was able to at least contest the shot a little bit. I mean, it's better than probably what would have happened last season. But just all around, not a particularly great play from the Kraken. And unfortunately, with the way this game is going, it probably puts it out of reach. And as we would find out, it did. At the very least, though, the Kraken do make this game interesting for the back half of the third, as just a couple minutes after this 2-0 goal goes in for the Kings, they send the Kraken to their second power play of the game, and not long into that power play, the Kraken find a way to score. It, kind of like the first goal for the Kings, kind of comes on a broken and somewhat unfortunate play for them. It starts as exactly the Kraken would like it to, a one-timer for Sprong that beats Copley, but not the post behind him, as that bounces out and into Copley's legs behind him, which then just leaves the puck kind of laying in the crease in front of a completely open net. Unfortunately, the Kings are there to jump on it first. Gavrikov gets his stick on it and just flings it out of the crease right through the slot, but not very far through the slot, is pretty much right at the top of the crease is Oliver Bjorkstrand putting his stick right where it needs to be. It turns out to be a honestly pretty perfect tape-to-tape pass from Gavrikov to Bjorkstrand, and Bjorkstrand finishes it with a power play goal, his 18th of the season for the Kraken, and it brings them back to within one with still plenty of time to tie it. As we know, they don't end up tying it in the final minutes. The Kings do end up getting a power play, but they kind of just use that to kill 2 minutes. I mean, the Kraken do kill it off pretty well. They had a couple of chances, I thought, to maybe make rushes shorthanded, which down one late in a game like that, you probably take those opportunities, even if they're a bit risky. They don't really take advantage of them, but that's fine. I mean, it's a shorthanded chance. It's not like it's a huge likelihood. Eventually, the Kraken end up pulling Jones, but they don't really ever get set up that much 6-on-5. They do for a little bit, but it ends up in the empty net eventually anyway to get to that 3-1 score, and that's where the game would end. So one more time with this game for the Kraken, it kind of comes down to whether or not you want to see things glass half full or glass half empty. Glass half full, the Kraken, again, played pretty well against a team that's hot going into what's certainly going to be a playoff spot, and stayed with them pretty much right up until the end. They just weren't able to come out on top, and if they're able to play this way against their remaining schedule, they're going to have no trouble not only making the playoffs as probably that top wildcard spot, but even have a pretty decent chance at hitting 100 points on the season. But glass half empty is, even if they kept it close, they lost again, and those teams, even if two of them have to catch them behind them in that wildcard hunt, are getting slightly closer, and maybe a little closer than you'd like. As for where I'm at with the Kraken right now, honestly, I do think I lean a little bit more towards that glass half full side, though I will admit, it is getting a little bit concerning that the Kraken seem to be kind of backing their way into the playoffs, at least as far as wins and losses are concerned. But again, they have at least been playing pretty well, even in those last couple of losses against the Kings and Wild. Sure, those are the two playoff teams that they've played recently and teams they could end up seeing in the first round, especially in the case of the Wild. But they've been playing well enough as far as the skaters again are concerned that they'll have no trouble making the playoffs if they can keep it up. And once they're in the playoffs, they're playing good competitive hockey and will at least make it interesting regardless of who they end up playing against. Really, these last couple of losses for me have come down to the goaltending matchup, and more so the great goaltending that the opposing teams have been getting in Copley in this game and Marc-Andre Fleury in the game against the Wild. Even if the goaltending for the Kraken, though, has been adequate for regular season goaltending, and I mean, yeah, perfectly average, when it gets to the postseason, it is that goaltending that the Kraken have seen against them with Copley and Fleury that you need. Goaltending just has to step up once the postseason rolls around, and that expectation has to rise if you're hoping to make any kind of run. Now, again, like we said in the beginning, all in all, big picture, I think we're just going to be happy to be in the playoffs. Yes, Obviously, you'd like to see the Kraken win a round, two, or heck, why not the Stanley Cup? But just making the playoffs in the second season and the massive improvement from last year has been more than enough fun. And again, I think the Kraken are more than going to do enough here in these last few games to be able to get us at least that one round, and we'll just see what happens from there. Finally, as for the Kraken 3 stars in this game, and I do think we can get 3 out of it, the first one for me is going to be a guy who actually doesn't end up with any points in this game. Well, only one Kraken player got any points, and that was Bjorkstrand with the unassisted power play goal, which, yes, originally did have the assists for Schultz and Sprong, but I guess they decided to take those away with the chaos in front of the King's net and the fact that, well, again, Bjorkstrand pretty much had the puck straight up passed to him by a King's player. But I'm going with Yanni Gord for this first star. Had really the best 200-foot game for the Kraken, even if it doesn't lead to points for him in the offensive end. He just played, well, perfect Yanni Gord hockey, forechecking, back-checking, setting up Tolvin for a breakaway, and just being a pest whenever he had the opportunity. So, Gord the first star. Second star, I will go with Bjorkstrand with the goal. He also had a great game, and obviously he's the only Kraken that scores, so he'll get one there. And then the third star for me is gonna be Will Borgen. Honestly, I thought he was the best defender for the Kraken in this game. Sure, both Larson and Dunn played pretty well, and probably will get more attention, but I thought Borgen really did have a strong game, especially in the first period. He was on the ice for one of the Kings' goals, the one that gets shot past him, but he did his best to make up for the puck getting stolen from Tanev. It just didn't turn out to be enough. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments section, who your 3 stars would be. Would you have had 3 stars, I think is a fair question as well. Also, just what you thought of this game in general and how you're feeling in these final 7 games of the season, as the Kraken will have 3 upcoming in every other fashion with the Arizona Coyotes. Then splitting that up is one with the Canucks, one with the Chicago Blackhawks, and then, of course, finishing the season with those 2 against Vegas. Until we do get to that first game against Arizona, though, on Monday. If you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below to help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. And, as always, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken!